Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and I gotta tell you that when I was living in Wales many years ago, there was a woman in my dorm room on the floor of my dorm, and her name was, I actually realized I just forgot her name, but I don't forget her voice because it was an unusual voice. And it turns out she was from a town that's spelled Lanelli. Now, our guest today, Rich White, who's just from the south of London. Rich, how do you think you would pronounce that town name?
Well, I know they've got Lantwit Major, and I know that Cardiff double D in Welsh is pronounced F. So this is a long way of saying I've got no idea. They make their own rules in Welsh.
Exactly. So when I first heard this name, I try to pronounce it, Lanelli, and she just looks at me like, oh my goodness, these Yanks are horrible. Well, it took me most of a school year to learn how to say the double L. And eventually I could say to her, oh yeah, you're from Flashy. And she would look at me and say, how do you know how to say my name or the name of her town? And of course, her accent was just completely unique though, because she had her own voice from her own place. And she and other Welsh people said, wow, you're the first American we've ever heard able to pronounce the double L. And it was through a lot of practice. And then some years later, I was walking around Swansea, which is in Wales where I went to school, and I heard some people walking down the street, and I heard them talking. And I immediately knew they're from Llanelli, which is a town only 30 miles from Swansea, but it was so unique that you immediately knew anyone from there. And this stuck with me that we all have this voice, and it's really obvious in Llanelli, where I hear your voice, I know you're from there immediately. But we all have this internal voice, this way we speak. And when you're speaking from your true voice, everyone hears it. They're like, oh yeah, that person, they're so authentic to themselves. I know that person's from Llanelli. But then we have this problem where a lot of us, we try to speak in some way that's not really authentic to us because we think that's how we should be speaking or how we ought to sound, and it ends up sounding terribly inauthentic. And that is my very long way of introducing our guest today, who's going to fix all these problems for us of not feeling authentic and not saying the right things. We have on the show today copywriting master, ghostwriter, Rich White. Welcome to Redbeard Radio.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you didn't know you're going to be quizzed on Welsh place names,
I didn't.
which is fair. It's a pretty esoteric topic. I had the benefit of being in a Welsh history class when I was in Wales, taught by a Welshman. So I learned, at least at the time, how to say all these names in at least a not horrible Yank fashion, if not actually authentically. But that story really stuck with me because this woman, whose name I've now forgotten, sadly, it was just so unique. And I thought, wow, she knows who she is. And she knows where she's from because her accent demands that you know these things. But for a lot of us, we just, we take a writing class or a Twitter course or a LinkedIn course, and then we try to copy how someone else writes. And it ends up being not us. And so, Rich, what I'm excited about today is talking with you because you've written for a variety of people and you've done the ghostwriting thing, right? So you've written as them and no one knows the difference, right?
Right.
And that's so interesting because you have to embody someone else. And I've done this a little bit. I once had a client say, he Bluetoothed his way into my soul and spoke the words that I did not know I had myself, which is the highest praise I've ever received from a client.
Yeah, that's powerful.
But that was for an email. Okay, that was for a single email, which is a different animal than ghostwriting for somebody, a huge email series or ads or a book. So I'd love to hear, Rich, a bit from you about how do you help your clients both find their true voice, but then also you take on their true voice so you can take their content production load off of them and they can focus on the other parts of their business.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite underrated. When I was sitting here nodding during your introduction, and particularly the part about people writing in a way they think they should write and come across rather than in an authentic way. And I think your number one, particularly for smaller businesses, if you're a founder of a small business or your business is in a community, where you can really be embraced by a particular audience. Number one thing is just how would you talk to them in person? In the way you and I are talking verbally now, this could be transcribed and our voices would largely come across through that text transcript. So I think that's always a really good starting point because the example that always stands out to me is where people get it they do this verbally too. I don't know if this is just something I'm seeing in England or if you get in America too, but in professional conversations, people start to say myself and yourself. So, I sent this to yourself. And you would never say that to a friend or an acquaintance. That's very, very overly formal. You know what I mean? That's something you would only say in the context of trying to be more professional and actually completely backfiring. And it just makes me feel disconnected from you because it's not a
Hmm.
human thing to say. Or if you send that to myself, I'll take care of it. And you think it sounds wrong. It's to a friend, you'd just
Uh-huh.
say, I'll take care of that for you. Send that to me. How can I help you? It's that kind of thing. It's just, how can I be human? What would you say to a friend? What would you say on the phone if you knew this person? That I think will get an awful lot of businesses much further than where they are to begin with. And then from then, it's just, if you know your audience, if you know the type of brand you're trying to be. I think Apple's a good example of this because they've define themselves so well, and it's not that they talk in a better way than any other brand necessarily, but they talk in a way that's very familiar, so you can always tell that it's Apple. And if they took on a much more formal style, it would just feel it wouldn't feel authentic to them anymore.
I don't think we have the same verbal tick as yourself and myself in the States. I'm sure we have other ones. The fact that I can't think of them right now is now probably a bad sign, but I can mention one from Canada. I talked with Philip Bussier in one of the Redbeard Radio interviews about marketing for small business, and the title's in French, which I won't try to repronounce because I pronounced it poorly then. But he talked about how French Canadian has a different word for emails than France French. And if you just use a translation service that says, we'll translate what you said to French, and then you send that out to French Canadians, the Quebecois are going to say, what? What's your problem? You're obviously not speaking French Canadian, and they know it. And I'm sure we have that kind of thing in American English.
Yeah, that's
Hopefully, I'm
amazing.
not
Yeah.
guilty of it. One of the most interesting things you just said is that speaking as yourself, and you made me think about, yeah, if we took the names off this interview and then we had people who already knew us, how well could they identify, oh yeah, that's the speaking pattern of Rich, that's the speaking pattern of Brian, or that's the turns of phrase they use, or that's the level of playfulness in their voice, or anything else. It's this writer's DNA, which we all need to create. But I'm curious, Rich, for you, you've read some of my emails, at least the ones since you booked the interview. I'm curious, because I love to go just do a process live in front of everybody. Well, not live, but recorded. And so we'll see how well I stack up to any kind of real standard. When you think about the emails you've gotten from me, what would you, how would you describe that voice, or however you describe that essence of how I speak or how I write?
I felt like you did a really good job of that. Like I could tell it was you. Obviously, you get so many emails nowadays that it's much harder to stand out specifically in that medium, just because you kind of bombarded. But there was no authenticity there, and what did really stand out to me was the type of thing you spoke about. I think that's just as important as how something is said, because if in the same for the same reason as what you said before, that people sound too formal, too professional, and it comes across stilted. The same thing happens with topics they won't touch. Let's take, for example, Donald Trump's presidency. That was an opportunity that creative marketers, writers, businesses latched onto Trump, both for and against him. But they were see this is such a divisive time in history that we can attract and repel consumers based on our willingness to attach our brand to this event. And I'm just using Trump as one example. This can be anything.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that got that really got that. Suddenly, this business means so much more to them. It's like, oh, we're really there's a connection here. That's such a powerful way of building loyalty and brand affinity and separating yourself from competition. Whereas brands that are a bit weaker, not weaker as a brand, but afraid to do that, can't build that same connection. You're much more dependent then on the service is great, the price is great, but as soon as one of those things changes, those customers are likely to leave because they haven't got the same affinity with you. So being prepared to talk about things that align with your personality and your values too can be tremendously powerful. So what stood out in your emails was there was just a genuine power there.
Well, thank you. For folks, if you've not seen any of my emails, if you go get my book, The Impact Framework, at redbeardimpact.com, you will both get a Meet Brian onboarding series, but you'll also get some follow up emails from that book that go into the concepts that are in the book, but they describe them in more story format. And one of the, I hope I can call it a hallmark of emails you get from me is that often they are about stories, not about boring things like marketing or sales. So you'll find stories about mountain climbing or shooting guns or falling into crevasses or sword fighting. And there's just all these stories where that's the interesting thing, right? Is that we get how many unread emails do you have in your inbox right now? Don't answer. Too many, right? Because they're boring. If they were more interesting, you would have opened them. And probably there's some people where when you get emails, you open them and you go, oh yeah, I want to read this person's emails. And it's because that person has demonstrated to you, wow, there's a lot of value here. So it's one thing to say, yes, you ought to have your own voice. That's nice. But Rich, part of the problem that I see in clients all the time is that there's 100 things that demand their attention. And how many emails should I write? What should my sales page sound like? Should I write a book? What should the book be about? There's a lot of questions there that they end up getting pushed to the side because there's all this crap they got to do. And so maybe they hurriedly write off an email for this one thing, but they don't really take the time to develop it. And a lot of business owners come to the point of, should I hire out that content creation in some fashion, whether it's for a book, for an email, for Twitter, whatever else? And I think one of the big challenges is, well, they don't know my topic like I do. They don't know my audience like I do, and they're not me. So how can I trust someone else who's not an expert at the thing I'm an expert at? How can I trust them to do a good job by my audience? And I'd love to hear how you handle that objection from people you're talking to about bringing you on in the copywriting or the ghostwriting function.
Yeah, I mean that's probably one of the top two objections that you hear. So I'm glad you brought that one up. I mean, for me, I'm in a slightly more privileged position because I've got a fairly extensive background. I've got case studies and whatnot that I can share and demonstrate that results and tone of voice and how this client and that client had different tone of voice that we were able to achieve for them. So you can the proof is there. But the number one thing I would say to any potential client with that is, what objections do you get in your business, and how do you demonstrate, how do you overcome that for your potential customer? Because every business, and I'm saying this kind of for aspiring writers and people considering hiring one, when you come to the point of what's the objection, just think, how would you overcome any objection? And really what they're looking for is they're looking to overcome the fear that maybe they're wasting money. So one thing I do in my business, for example, because this has been inspired by the really positive feedback that we get, but I've implemented a new service guarantee for new clients. If they don't like the first piece of content that they get from us, I give them a full refund and I pay them £50 on top. With the exchange rate, I guess that's somewhere around $70, which is just that overcomes that objection without me even having to do anything, because it's saying, look, if your worry here is wasting money, I'll give it all back and I'll pay you some more on top. You just don't need to worry about it. I'm that confident in the service that we provide.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of, to get into the meat of your question, how do you really get into finding that tone of voice? Part of it is just experience of being a writer. I think anyone is capable of putting a sentence together. And this is one of the problems. People think, oh, I'll just do it myself. It's only writing. When they come to do it, they realize it's actually quite stressful, because even if they can write well, it probably takes a lot longer than they anticipated, or it needs editing, or it's not as clear, but they can physically put words and sentences and paragraphs together. The skill is in refining that. The skill is in doing it quicker. And it's also in knowing what to say. So, for example, you see so many businesses who are focused on just listing features. We can do this, this, and this. When, in the same vein as I just said, that what their fears and concerns are is wasting money, so we can talk to that. The people reading that content have their own things they're looking for, things they're looking to overcome. So the content needs to address that. They're not probably looking for a list of features, they're looking for outcomes.
One of the things you didn't mention that's really important is also the right content for the right platform.
Yes,
2 of my
100%.
heroes, John Lee Dumas of Entrepreneur on Fire and Stu McLaren of the Tribe Experience. Stu's been on the podcast, JLD will be someday. They both have horrible Twitter accounts. They have many tens of thousands of followers, and they routinely get not a single like on their posts. Now, you already know the answer without looking, Rich. Why is this? It's because they're syndicating content from Facebook, which is their main place where they have influence, and they're syndicating it to Twitter without ever writing anything original for Twitter, and they do not engage on Twitter at all. And so you see a 70,000 person account with 0 likes most of the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And what does that mean? It looks horrible, right? How can Stu McLaren or JLD of all people, be getting 0 likes? But that's normal.
Yeah, I saw something on Twitter earlier on today that I think is really on point with this. Someone tweeted an upcoming change to email stats in a new iPhone update. Someone replied to that and said, tweak this and repost it as a thread. And they did. And when they redid it as a thread, the engagement was so much higher because exactly what you just said, it was contextual to the platform rather than being syndicated for another one. So, yeah, that really feeds into knowing the audience. Why are they on this platform? Which is true of everything. That's true of reading a print ad in the newspaper. It's true of reading an email. It's true of reading a tweet. It's true of looking at pictures on Instagram. And you're 100% right that so many people, I think it comes back to what you said before, that they think we'll do this email and we'll get it off the to-do list without it necessarily being as good as it could be. So when you start looking at all of these platforms as just a tick box exercise, we need to post on Twitter, that's done. We need to post on Instagram, that's done. We need to send an email, that's done. You can get anything done without it being very good or without it having any impact.
Okay, we need to go put that into quote art right there. Say that again.
I think I said you can get anything done without it being very good.
Oh, Rich, that is perfect. You're making me think about how we treat our content creation. And as you're talking, I was thinking, yeah, so you could treat your content creation like cleaning your sink in your kitchen, where you clean it and then it's done. Or you could think of it more like working in your garden, where this is a many years long plan. You're in a relationship with the plants, the water, the sun, the soil. And there isn't a done exactly. There might be a done today, but there's not a done tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so many of us, we think, oh yeah, I got to go clean my kitchen. I got to go sweep the floor. Okay, the floor is swept. Peace out. I'm done. Where we just, and we don't have enough time, right? We don't have the energy, the resources to say, oh yeah, I have a whole day to write this email. Most of us don't have that. So tell me, Rich, for people who are interested in your point of view and they're thinking, maybe I should talk to Rich about writing some emails or some tweets or taking my Facebook content, which is good, and rewriting it for Twitter, where I'm currently getting no engagement.
Mm-hmm.
What's the procedure look like? What does a typical new client engagement look like with your firm?
So we have a short onboarding process, which is predominantly to get to know each other. Because if we don't think we can be of help to you, then we'll be upfront about that. But that initial step is exactly what we've been talking about. It's how do we get to know your brand, your voice, your audience? What are you selling? What are you offering? What do people want from you? We really do a deep dive to find out as much as we can about that new client. And yeah, what they're offering and what their people are buying, basically. And then that is a shortcut for us to create content that has the most impact right from the beginning. And to that point, what happens a lot of the time is a lot of the content online focuses on how to. So it's when you break that down, that's really looking at people or appealing to people who know they've got a problem and they're actively looking for a solution, right? Which is great. You 100% need that content. The problem comes from the fact that that's not all of the audiences out there. You also have people who are just beginning to look or who are trying to find out what the problem is, or they know what the solution is and they just want someone to do it for them. So you've got multiple audiences and a lot of businesses are just creating content for one. So we come in, we really get to know the audience, what you do, who you can help, and then we talk to all of those audiences. So we can create content for people at different stages. For the people who are more familiar with the terminology, this is different stages of the funnel, the different buyer stages of the buyer journey. we can elevate the marketing strategy for our clients, but the onboarding is we have an initial conversation, we find out what you do, what your objectives are, um, because if your objectives are too ambitious for what content can deliver in a given time frame, then we'll manage those expectations too. And then really it's just about getting to know that client and their business as much as possible. And then we don't work with contracts, so to the same reason that I offer a money back guarantee for having the confidence in the service. All I say to clients is just give me 30 days notice if you don't want to continue, and then I live and die by the quality of the service that we provide.
Hmm. How long does it take people to see results on average from working with you?
So, I mean, generally we say you should commit for at least 3 months, because it can take some time for this to be, indexed in Google, for people to find it, for people to share it. But sometimes it happens really quick. I mean, we have one client at the moment. I've just been doing some analytics for them. They've got a 58% increase in site traffic in a couple of months. Others can take a bit longer. I mean, it really does depend on their industry. Is this a brand new website? Has it already got some prestige? Do people already know it in their space? But I generally say to people, it's not like adverts. You can run Google and Facebook ads and you can start generating leads that same day, the next day. But the
Hmm.
trade off of that is, as soon as you stop spending that money, those
Right.
adverts stop delivering leads. Content's kind of the flip side of that. It can take a bit longer to generate the results, but the trade off there is they're long lasting. You don't turn that content
Hmm.
off unless you delete it. So there's a much much longer shelf life. So generally speaking, I say to new clients, be prepared to invest in this for at least 3 months, by which point you should expect to see a significant enough results that you want to continue.
What size of companies usually work with you in terms of their annual revenue? Is there a too small to call up rich? Is there too big to call up rich?
Not really. I mean, so typically we work with slightly larger ones, revenue wise, low millions a year. But
Hmm.
I think the only real metric here is, can you commit to it for a few months? Because from strictly speaking, from a content point of view, what can't it do? It's never really too early to implement it. You can start building that audience very very early, especially if you've got something in place to keep their details on file, like an email list. Then even if this is before a product launches, you've got an audience in place that you can run ideas past, you can get their feedback on product ideas, and then when you launch, you've got this audience there that you can sell to straight away. It's never too early. The main thing is, it, does this fit into your overall marketing strategy, and have you got the cash flow to afford an expense? Because sometimes it does just make more sense for a business founder at the early days to manage that blog till they've got the resources to build up. So normally we're in the sort of low millions annual turnover, but we do consider larger and smaller.
Brilliant. Where can someone go to reach out to you to talk more about their content?
Yeah, so the website is crosshairsmarketing.co.uk. And then on there's contact options.
Brilliant. Rich, thanks for being on Redbeard Radio.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.